Okay, so just drawing on your Bible knowledge, what is our segue? How do we connect from Genesis 3, Adam and Eve and their sin and the consequences, to Genesis 6 and Noah? How do we get from one to the other? Okay, we got the genealogies, right? Now here's what's interesting. As you look at chapters 4 and 5, there are in fact two distinct genealogies. In chapter 4, whose genealogy do we get? Look at chapter 4.
It's Cain, right?
It's Cain. We get the genealogy of Cain and his descendants. In chapter 5, whose genealogy do we get? We get Seth's, right? Both of these obviously would go back to Adam. The distinguishing is through which son. In chapter 4, the genealogy is traced through Cain. In chapter 5, the genealogy is traced through Seth. So we get one genealogy, we get another genealogy, and then we come to chapter 6, and this is where the story seems to pick up, right? And we're introduced to this, actually it's the end of chapter 5, we're introduced to Noah. And in chapter 6, what is the condition of things in the world? Wickedness. Okay? In verse 5, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thought of his heart was only evil continually. Yes, sir. Who was Noah descended from? Well, as you look here at chapter 5, it looks like in verse 6 we are tracing this through Seth. And as we move forward through Seth, we're going to come through Enoch and Methuselah, Lamech, and then verse 29, Noah. That would be how I would answer that question. As you look there at chapter 5, you notice this genealogy. We have approximately 8 generations. 8 generations from Adam's creation to Noah. But how long is that, 8 generations? Typically, in our accounting of things, 8 generations is going to be around 350 years or so. Here, 8 generations takes you how long? Anyone want to guess? 1,600 years. About 1,600 years. Because you've got some folks that live a really, really long time here. If you want to add this up for yourself sometime, for example, the days of Adam, when Adam lived 130 years, he became a father of a son in his own likeness according to his image, and he named him Seth. So Adam is 130 years when Seth is born. If you count up all of the years when someone is born, not the length of their life, but when they're born, that's going to give you all these generation totals, and that's going to end up somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500 to 1,600 years. So you've got 1,500 or 1,600 years from when Adam was created to now Genesis 6, the story of Noah. But you've only got 8 generations, okay? And as you're factoring in this 1,600 years and 8 generations, how long does Adam live? 930 years. Okay? He lives a total of 930 years, and so he's going to be alive in the days of Seth, obviously. He's going to be alive in the days of Enosh and Kenan, and also Mahalalel, easy for me to say. And as you look at those ages of birth, you can trace that down a little bit further. You've got Adam, rather, is going to live 930 years. And then who's our other long-living person in this story? Methuselah, who lives how long? 969 years, okay? And so you've got a lot of overlap there. And in fact, there's a possibility that Noah would have been able to hear a firsthand account. He would not have been a contemporary of Adam, but he could have been a contemporary of those who were contemporaries with Adam, if that makes sense. And so how would some of these people know? Because we are, as you know, before the law of Moses here. So how would some of these people know about the days of creation? Well, either they could have talked to Adam about it, or they could have talked to Granddaddy about it, who lived with Adam. And that really joins this whole narrative together. The world is completely different now. It's still trees and plants and animals and humans, but sin has entered the world, and not only has sin entered the world, sin has spread all throughout the world. In Genesis 6, 5 through 7, God looks down from heaven and sees that every intent of the thoughts of the heart of man is only evil continually. And in verse 6, this goes back to lesson number 1. What does God feel in verse 6? This is an emotion, right? Here is evidence of personhood, right? He feels something. God is not just some amorphous force out there like in Star Wars, right? God is a person. He feels, he speaks, he communicates. But here in Genesis 6 and verse 6, he feels. He is grieved that he has made man. And so he determines to do what in verse 7? Going to destroy the earth. I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things and to birds of the sky, for I am sorry that I have made them. But lest we become too overwhelmed with grief, the very next passage tells us what? While there is evil all throughout the world, there is a notable exception, and it is Noah. And Noah has found grace in the eyes of the Lord. So finding grace in God's eyes, Noah is instructed by God to do what? Build a boat. And this boat is to be filled with what? Animals and? Okay, animals and provisions and? Anyone who will get inside, right? Anyone who will get inside, all right? Anyone who believes what Noah is saying can come inside. How do we know that? Doesn't necessarily specify it here in Genesis. Come over to 2 Peter. Look at 2 Peter chapter 2. Segundo de Pedro capítulo 2. Verso 5. 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 5. And if God did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah what does it say? What was Noah? Preacher of righteousness. Right? Noah's not just sitting around all day building a boat. What else is Noah doing? He's preaching. He is trying to convince people to do what? Yeah, change their behavior. Be saved from the judgment that is to come. Okay, judgment was coming. And in fact, we notice this. Come back to Genesis chapter 6 and go back up a couple of verses to verse 3. Genesis chapter 6 and in verse 3. How long does man have before judgment comes? 120 years, right? Genesis chapter 6 and verse 3 is not a shortening of the lifespan, and then Psalm 90 is another shortening of a lifespan, right? Psalm 90, our years are 70. If by reason of strength they are 80, if they are soon cut off and we fly away. Psalm 90 is not a God standing up there and shortening the lifespan of man from 969 to 80. But neither is Genesis chapter 6 and verse 3. God's not dealing with human life expectancy here. What is he saying in Genesis chapter 6 and verse 3?
You got 120 years to build that boat.
You got 120 years to build the boat, Noah, and you've got 120 years if you're going to respond to my grace and get on the boat. Because in 120 years, God says, what am I going to do? Right, I'm going, and this is where we get right to verse 7. I'm going to blot out mankind and animals. And so man is given 120 years to respond to God. God is nothing if not what? Patient and gracious and merciful. So as you come through chapter 6 and come over to chapter 7, Noah follows God's plan. He builds the boat. The boat is constructed of gopher wood in verse 14, as per God's designation. There were rooms within the ark covered inside and out with pitch. There was a specific length to the ark, a window for the ark. Verse 16, those of you who have taught children's Bible class, did you ever labor long to try to find an ark picture for your Bible class that had only one window in it? Right? Like you have the description here. Seems like all of the children's pictures of the ark have windows, everyone, giraffe sticking his head out, right? As we look at what is described here in Genesis chapter 6, there was a window. You had a door of the ark in the side of it. You shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. And then you are to bring your family with you, verse 18. You shall enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds after their kind, the animals after their kind, every creeping thing that creeps on the ground after its kind, 2 of every kind will come with you to keep them alive. As for you, take for yourself some of all food which is edible, and gather it to yourself, and it shall be for food for you and for them. And verse 22 then is what we notice. Thus Noah did according to all that God had commanded him, so he did. Noah does what God commanded. In fact, he'll be praised in the book of Hebrews in chapter 11 for doing what? Acting and doing all of this by what? Faith. By faith, that's right. So here is Noah acting by faith. Faith, Romans chapter 10 and verse 17, as we have pointed out, requires communication from God. Here's the communication from God, and in order to act by faith, in order to be faithful, Noah does what God says. He constructs the ark, and then they get into the ark. And let's notice here, chapter 7, capítulo 7, verso 1, God says to Noah, chapter 7 and verse 1, enter the ark, you and all of your household, for you alone I have seen to be righteous before me in this time. So here is Noah coming into the ark, bringing the animals in with him. They get on the ark. Now notice this. They get on the ark and do what? Wait. Imagine getting in the ark, sealing it up, caulking it, as it were, and then you do what with all of these animals and your 7 family members? You hang out. And how long do you hang out? 7 days. We say till it starts raining, but what have you never experienced before? You've never experienced rain before. It's not rained on the face of the earth before. God's told you the heavens are going to open, it's going to flood. You've never experienced anything like that before. God tells you to get on the boat, you get on the boat, and day 1 passes, and what? Nothing happens, and day 2 passes. And day 3, and day 4, and day 5, and nothing happens. You talk about faith, here's Noah's faith. He does what? He stays on the boat. He stays on the boat. Verse 5 of chapter 7. Noah did according to all the Lord had commanded him. He was 600 years old when the flood water came upon the earth. That right there, that verse, if you're interested in trying to track chronology of the book of Genesis, that helps you kind of nail down when the flood would be post post the birth of Seth and the creation of Adam. Then Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him entered the ark because of the water of the flood. Clean animals, unclean animals entering the ark. After 7 days, the water of the flood came upon the earth in the 600th year of Noah's life. In the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on the same day, all of the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the skies were open. So, two different things happening here. Where's water coming from? From above and below. Right? There is some indication here. I understand well why, as Christians, we would push back against the Darwinian evolutionist concepts and things like that. But I'm not so sure as we read this passage that, for example, the idea of Pangea, all the earth's landmass once being one, I'm not convinced that's not a biblical idea, because when you have these fountains of the deep opening up and bursting open, will that affect Earth's topography? Yes. Certainly it could. Certainly it could. So you have water from above, water from below. You have water covering the entire face of the earth. Rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. Again, what had never happened before up to this point. You've never had rain before. You've got Noah and his family on the ark. The flood came upon the earth. This is verse 17. Verso 17. The flood came upon the earth for 40 days, and the water increased and lifted up the ark so that it rose above the earth. The water prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. The water prevailed more and more upon the earth, so that all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered. So describe the nature of this flood. Universal. Universal. Verse 20 rather. The water prevailed 15 cubits higher, and the mountains were covered. All flesh that moved on the earth perished, birds and cattle and beasts and every swarming thing that swarms upon the earth, and all mankind, of all that was on the dry land, all in whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life, died. And in verse 24, the water prevailed upon the earth 150 days. So 40 days of increasing water, and then seemingly here 150 days of the water reaching a stasis, as it were. And then we get the water starting to subside in chapter 8 and verse 1. Noah's going to send out birds. You remember this story? To find out if it's safe to go out of the ark now. After doing that a few times, it's time to leave the ark. Then God spoke to Noah. This is chapter 8 in verse 15. Capítulo 8, verso 15. God spoke to Noah saying, get out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives with you. And so in verse 18, Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, and every bird, everything that moves on the earth went out by their families from the ark. And what's the first thing that Noah does? Builds an altar to the Lord, and took of every clean animal and every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. The Lord smelled the soothing aroma, and the Lord said to himself, I will never again curse the ground on account of man, for the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth, and I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done while the earth remains. Seed time and harvest and cold and heat and summer and winter and day and night shall not cease. And in evidence of this promise, God placed what in the sky? He places the rainbow, right. Okay, so that gets us where we need to be in summarizing this story. The episode at the end of this is rather disheartening. Noah gets off the ark, trying to get back to what we could call normal life, and he plants a vineyard, but does what? He gets drunk, and his drinking leads to, as you look at verse 21, he drank of the wine and became drunk and uncovered himself inside of his tent. That is a Hebrew expression, he uncovered himself. There are a couple of different ideas as to what that could mean. It could mean that he acts in like a drunken stupor and exposes himself improperly to those who are around him. That could be part of the explanation here. There's another way in which this phrase is used to uncover one's nakedness. You can see this in Leviticus chapter 18, where uncovering one's nakedness is a reference to sexual activity. And it could be one of the ideas here, and this is kind of the idea that currently I not prefer in the sense that it's good, but prefer in the sense that I think this is what the text is revealing. In verse 22, Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father. Could be the explanation here. Noah gets so drunk, this son comes in and has sexual relations with Noah's wife. And Noah, because of his drunken condition, is in no condition to protect his wife, to stop this act of ungodliness and things like that. That's why Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it upon both of their shoulders and walked backwards and covered the nakedness of their father. This scene has happened that is ungodly. They show respect for their mother and their father, even though he is drunk and has allowed this to happen. Their faces were turned away so that they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine, he knew what his youngest son had done to him. So he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the servant of servants he shall be to his brothers." But he also said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem." It's a demoralizing end to Noah's story. I would hope, as I think you would too, that what we read in the book of Hebrews in chapter 11 actually serves as the end of Noah's story, right? That Noah is accounted faithful. Here he made a bad choice, right? He erred. He sinned. But as he is praised later in the New Testament, in the book of Matthew, in the books of 1st and 2nd Peter, and in the book of Hebrews, hopefully what that reveals to us is that Noah found place for repentance and is counted then among the faithful. Let's talk some about the story. Let's run through these questions. Question number 1 here. What does it mean that Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord? This kind of ties in nicely to what we talked about Wednesday night. What does it mean that Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord?
God chose to preserve mankind
Okay.
through Noah.
God chose to preserve mankind through Noah.
Amongst all other men, and gave him that blessing.
Okay.
It says he was blameless and righteous.
Okay, so Noah is blameless and righteous in the midst of a world that is ungodly. Okay, go ahead, Lynn.
Demonstrated faith.
He demonstrates faith.
Yes.
Okay. What were you saying, Lynn?
I was just going to make a point. I don't know how many people in this room might built their own house. Probably very few, if any. Can you imagine how long it took Noah and the hard work, year after year after year after year? That gives you some insight into his character.
Sure.
And the thing that I've been awed by is the love that he had for God, to be obedient, to do that. Because you and I know there's a lot of people, they don't like physical work. And that was a very physical job.
It was. And to do all of that while sharing this message of doom, this message of a flood, and the first thing people would ask is, what's a flood? What's a flood? And Noah is undeterred. He goes about that. You learn something great about the character of Noah here. It's a good point, Lynn. Bill?
He was one of the few people that obeyed God during that time. I think that goes without saying. And also he did this while he was being constantly ridiculed
Okay.
by everyone.
Very good. Connie?
And it also shows that God has given already instruction to man on what he wants.
Very good.
And so Noah had been taught by someone, his father, whoever. So they knew what to do.
Sure. And this is where, remember, we have talked previously about kind of the 3 different segments of human history, right? You've got what we are in now, whether you call it the Christian age or the gospel age, the age of the Messiah's kingdom, whatever you want to call it. Prior to that, you have what? The Mosaic age, right? The time of the law of Moses, which begins where? When did that time period begin? Moses, Mount Sinai, right? Exodus 19, Exodus 20. That's when the law is given. So prior to that, that's where we are here in Genesis in the first half of the book of Exodus, right? Before the law of Moses is given. That time period is called the patriarchal period. Called the patriarchal period, why? God is speaking to the patriarchs, to the fathers. That's what's referenced at least one point in Hebrews chapter 1. Which is why we made that point at the beginning about the genealogies and the ages and things like that. Noah would not have been a contemporary of Adam, but he would have been a contemporary of those who had been contemporaries with Adam. How would Noah, how would folks on the earth have known what to do? God had already done what? God had already spoken to the fathers. Those messages had been shared and passed down. We know that because who in the lineage of Noah had lived a godly life? Enoch. Very good. Enoch had. And I think if my math is right, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it is Methuselah who dies in the year of the flood, if I am not mistaken. And so living 969 years, maybe he died before the flood came. We can all hope that. Because if he dies in the flood, what does that reveal about him? He had fallen away, and how sad that would be. Lamech.
The years come out exactly so that he died before it started raining.
So as overbearing as genealogies can be, and I get that, there's also some really interesting backstories tucked into the genealogies if we take time to kind of work through them. Mitch.
There's a passage in Matthew chapter 9 where Jesus looks out over the crowd and has compassion for them because they are sheep without a shepherd, and it saddens him. I imagine what it must have been like for Adam. Mm-hmm. He was there. He had fellowship with God, and he lost it. And he knows exactly why he lost it.
Yeah.
And then he has to watch the corruption of everybody that came from his seed. None of them truly knowing what was lost because they hadn't experienced it. I just imagine if anybody ever wanted a solution that God was bringing for the sins of mankind, it had to be Adam.
And who else might have been looking down with compassion on sheep without a shepherd? How about God? And he's looking for a reason. He's looking for a way to help, to redeem what has been lost. And he finds whom? And he finds Noah. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Doesn't mean that he was perfect. If he was perfect, it wouldn't be what? Wouldn't be grace. But he sees somebody in Noah who is upright, who is striving to do what is right. Grace is shown to him. Todd.
Just noticing all the different translations that some of them say he found favor, and some of them say he found grace. I'm not sure what word that's derived from, but, you know, in my mind, when I think of favor, he was, because as Lynn said, he was upright and righteous, that God was showing him favor, which I guess, you know, grace, in that he's willing to save him because he and obviously his children followed his example.
Sure. All right, I'm going to skip over 2 and 3. We're going to come back to those if we have time at the end of class. Yes, Brother Maldonado.
We are right when I say Noah had faith before God already building the ark.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Noah had faith.
Noah had faith before he built the ark? I would tend to agree with that statement, yes, sir.
I think Noah must have
talking with God before he built the ark, because God says, hey, Noah, you're going to go build an ark. And we didn't hear Noah be like Moses, like, whoa, holy crap.
Who am I that I should build the ark?
Yeah. So it's kind of like, oh, okay. You know, I've been talking with you. I know who you are.
Sure. It's not too dissimilar from what we see with Moses later. Neither is it dissimilar with what we see with Job. Job is not privy to the conversation, but it is a similar conversation,
Like they
similar
have a
happening.
relationship somehow.
Absolutely.
I don't know how, but
Sure.
somehow.
Brother Roach, yes, sir?
Faith working with works perfects faith.
Absolutely.
He had faith, he obeyed,
Sure.
and his faith became stronger.
Good point. Virginia?
I didn't catch what you said about Noah. You said something a few steps back, and I probably lost it in the conversation, but I didn't really catch everything you said about Noah.
I've said a lot about Noah in the last 35 minutes.
Starting.
Noah was faithful. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord.
Something else.
Well, we'll try to track back at some point and mine that out. Bruce, you've had your hand up for a while. Yes, sir.
We see in this that God, we talked about God showing emotion
Uh-huh.
and God disappointment and anger with the world that He
Yes.
created, but He didn't allow that emotion to get
Acted in arbitrary.
judgment on the world, because He still saw that Noah was faithful and that his family was faithful, because God could have completely wiped everything out of His anger and disappointment with everything. Like I think we as Christians do a lot of times with our emotions. We let it impact
Fly off
our
the handle?
judgment sometimes.
Yeah. Good point. Here is God exercising restraint and self-control in that He is not acting like a petulant child and just, throwing all the pieces off the game board, folding up the game board, and walking away with it. He is patient, and He looks and He sees one who is righteous, and He's extending grace here. We'll come back to 2 and 3 if we have time. Number 4. Did Noah put 2 of every animal on the ark? All right. So, there you go, Wes. There's the answer. At least 2 of every animal on the ark, right? How many of each clean animal? So for a total of 14. And of the unclean animals, 2, which gives you 4. So it seems to be 14 total of the clean animals and 4 of the unclean, which leads us then to thought question number 1. Did you think about this? Clean and unclean animals as designated categories only come to us where? In the law of Moses. But as we have rightly noted, this all is happening prior to the law of Moses. So, how do we explain that? Okay, not everybody at the same time. Mike, you were saying something. How do we explain this?
Well, He must have revealed that will
Okay.
at some time.
Okay, so one answer might be that God had at some point revealed this to the pre-Mosaic people. That could be one answer here. Danica?
And Moses is the one that's writing this, and by the time he wrote it, that had already been determined.
So Moses is the author of these first 5 books of the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And Moses is writing for whom?
For the Jews.
For the Jews. This would have been something with which they were familiar. And so Moses is writing to them about the animals that Noah sacrificed. Perhaps it was with communication from God, but these animals happen to fall into the categories that the Jews understood as being clean and unclean. Mike?
Well, Abel and Cain are, I think, the first example of the sacrifice being offered, one being proper, one being, so something was communicated to them, what was proper. So there's always been
There's something communicated to to Noah here.
a way to be obedient to God.
Good point. And just if you're interested, Luke chapter 24 is one of the passages that confirms for us that Moses wrote these first 5 books of the Old Testament. That's Luke chapter 24. Yes, Lynn?
Well, we know Cain and Abel, one was pleasing, one was not pleasing.
There was some sort of revelation God had given. Absolutely there was. Number 2, give an example of how the story of Noah is referenced in the New Testament. 1 Peter chapter 3, in the context where Peter says, there is also an antitype which now saves you, comparing baptism and the resurrection of Christ and its power to the story of Noah and the flood. All right, very good. How else is the story of Noah referenced in the New Testament?
Well, you mentioned
Hebrews 11.
the preacher of righteousness in 2 Peter.
2 Peter chapter 2, Noah the preacher of righteousness.
Matthew 24.
And Matthew 24, the suddenness of all of this happening at a time when people were unprepared. And Jesus picks up on that theme in his Olivet Discourse there in Matthew chapter 24. All right, question number 3, does God have the power to destroy the earth with water?
Yes.
Will he ever do it again? How do we know that? He said it, and covenant of the rainbow in the sky. Very good. So God has the power to do something, but he tells us he will never again do it. God has the power to do what to himself? To limit himself. God has the power to limit himself, which helps us then begin to understand. I struggle to think anyone will ever perfectly understand the incarnation, Christ as God coming in flesh. But at least a principle like we're seeing here with God as it relates to the flood can perhaps help us in our minds begin to wrap our arms around the idea of God coming in the flesh if God has the capability to limit himself. Not being limited externally by anything, then he would not be God, but being able to exercise limitations within himself that he imposes upon himself. Todd, did I see your hand up?
Yes, just back to the rainbow, with some of the challenges in our society with what the rainbow has come
Yes.
to symbolize. I read a good article, I think it was entitled, You Can't Take Our Rainbow, or, we had the rainbow, or, God's covenant
Yeah.
preceded any of this, and I, that's one of the things that you have to be careful about, because you don't want to seem unkind or hateful, but, the rainbow, when I see it, I still think about God's promise, and it's just unfortunate that has happened.
You wear this, and like a pop culture quote goes, you keep using these words, I do not think that you know what they mean. You wear the rainbow, I don't think you actually understand what biblically this is all about. Let's get number 5 before we get to number 4. Number 5, how do I see Jesus in this story? This is a question we're going to see throughout this study, especially as we're in the Old Testament. How do we see Jesus in the story of Noah? Kind of the important question in all of this, right?
We talked about it.
Obedience. Okay, we see the principle of faith and obedience and grace. Very good. Saving man. Okay.
Talks about the washing of water.
The washing of water, right, in 1 Peter chapter 3. Very good. Anything else? Sacrifice. Dedication. Okay. I wrote, as God offered salvation to mankind through the flood waters and the ark, we are offered salvation today through baptism and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. 1 Peter chapter 3. Very good.
Tyler?
Yes, Dave.
Judgment.
Judgment. Very good. Very good. All right, number 4. What does this story teach me about marriage?
His wife definitely was submissive.
His wife was submissive. Okay, very good.
Sure, we'll go on that boat.
She gets on the boat. All right. Says something about a father's influence over his children, that he lives in such a way that his children do what?
Obey.
Follow him. Okay.
She respected her husband.
She respected her husband. Lynn?
One man and one wife.
One man, one wife.
Man chose his wife.
Man chose his wife. Okay. Anything else? Male and female.
Be fruitful and multiply. It was the spouses that he brought in order to do that.
Okay. Be fruitful and multiply. Right. We're fulfilling God's command there. Anything else? One of the connections I made, and this gets back to questions 2 and 3 that we skipped over, You have this in the first 3 or 4 verses. Verse 1 particularly, verse 2 rather. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves. There's a lot of rather fanciful ideas that have been advanced about this passage. I'm not going to delve into all of them. My view is probably pretty simple on this. Genesis 4 is the genealogy of Cain. Genesis 5 is the genealogy of Seth, through whom the promise is going to come, through whom Noah comes. I see that statement there in Genesis chapter 6, verses 2 and 3 about sons of God and daughters of men as describing these two different lines of humanity, Cain and Seth. You had one line that seems to be godly and one line that seems to be generally ungodly. And in Genesis chapter 6 and verse 3, what's going on? They're intermarrying. Okay? I would just submit to you that one of the things we might learn about marriage from this story of Noah is we need to be careful about who we choose to marry. And we need to marry someone that is going to draw us closer to God and not draw us farther away from Him. All right? Appreciate your attention this morning. Thanks for your time. Hopefully you have a lesson book now. If you don't, there are a couple more available. This will be our book through the rest of the year, and we are on to lesson 4 next week. Thank you.